year. You do that one every year?
Not a bad idea.
Well, I got an invite, but the scheduling is kind of tough. Do you take the plane? Bring my Sudoku as well.
I think we are straight up 9 o'clock. Director, I will turn it over to you. You probably have a better idea of who's going to join us and who's not, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does look like we have our commissioners online, but would you like me to do a roll call for quorum?
Yeah, let's do that.
So you can do. Commissioner Meyer? Here. Commissioner Racines? Commissioner Pope? Here. Commissioner Wallace? Here. Commissioner Naves?
Here.
And Commissioner Reville?
Here.
And Chairman Gordon.
Thank you, I'm here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Well, let's proceed. Thank you, Anthony. Lots has happened over the last couple of months. I want to particularly thank members of the commission for being able to carry on without their chairman for at least one meeting. And thank you very much for continuing this really important effort. With that, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll typically just do a few confirmations regarding our tech stack here and then a few quick announcements and we'll move forward. So Mr. Erickson gives me a quick thumbs up. We are live. We are recording. Transcription and closed captions are both activated. And just give me a little bird call if our special guest shows up. Thank you. In terms of quick announcements, agendas and sign-in sheets are in the back of the room. If you wouldn't mind filling out that sign-in sheet, it's always helpful for us. Thank you. And as the disclaimer that I typically read before these meetings, key decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. At this time, no blockchain has been selected for deployment of Wyoming Stable Tokens, and no Wyoming Stable Tokens have been issued. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, the governor, or a majority vote of the commission. Information outside of these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. At this time, those are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming Legislature website at wyoleg.gov, and our social media channels with the @WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. With that being said, Mr. Chairman, if I would like to review today's agenda, do we get a quick thumbs up on it, and we'll go from there.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in terms of today's agenda, we'll go through the meeting minutes and look to approve those from our last discussion on March 21st. We'll go through the monthly budget review for the month March, as of March 31st. We'll talk about relocating one and rescheduling one of our subsequent meetings. We will have our typical stable token industry update, and we will also review speaking of lots of movement in the last month, I would say there's a lot of movement in the last 24 hours. We'll also review the Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stablecoin Act. And we may also have a guest to help us walk through that as we move forward. We'll then move on to job content questionnaires. As a reminder, these were some of the documents that were generated for our conversations with the Joint Appropriations Committee. And the goal here is to approve these. We begin the process of posting these and hopefully bringing on some additional resources as we move forward. We'll go through some logistics that'll include a quick update from our last discussion on the budget session as a whole. I will quickly point out a few things on the contact list. That'll be our rolling documents moving forward, where you'll have an idea of who we are speaking to and about what, i.e. vendors and potential subcommittee members. We'll walk through a rulemaking memo. This is something that we touched on at the end of the last discussion we had, and now we've gone a little bit deeper on that. We'll move forward on that. We'll quickly touch on a procurement timeline and the subcommittees and working groups, which will be more conversational than anything with the document behind it. Move into public comment and then cover off on our next meetings and events. Are there any questions on the agenda?
Questions? If not, I'd move approval of the agenda. Or I'd have somebody move it, sorry.
So moved.
Second, moved and second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will, what I'd like to do next is have the commission approve the meeting minutes from our last discussion occurring on March 21st. That was STC 12. This was sent out around, so I hope everyone had a chance to look at it, but if you wanted me to perform a high-level review of the minutes, I'm happy to do so.
Commissioners, I think you've had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any changes or is there any need to go through a review? It's been moved by the treasurer for approval. Is there support for the motion? Been seconded by Commissioner Pope. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to our next item on the docket here. This will be the monthly budget review. Again, these are the long pieces of paper you have in front of you, of which there are two. One is a summary that I put together, and the other is the backing detail provided from our team at A&I. So what I'd like to just quickly mention here as we go through the summary sheet is the first line item, salaries and benefits, is always kind of our main mover of the budget. This is now kind of settled out. We've had some oscillation in past months, being that there were months where, let's say, September rolled into October, or months where benefits rolled over from one month to the other, but now we've stabilized and we'd expect the number to stay stable as we move forward. In terms of travel, we did capture some travel in the March line items for myself and some of the commissioners around our meeting in February, our STC-013, as well as the budget session. So that is captured there. In terms of support services, again, there's minimal activity, again, some of it pertaining to events in February and early March that I attended, particularly the ETH Denver Summit. And we've also now, starting in January and now again stabilizing across February and March, we have charges that were being incurred on our behalf and essentially by ETS have now moved to our line items appropriately. So this is the monthly charge for mobile devices, monthly plans, and also a virtual private network that we've established for a home office. I would also.
I just want to be sure that the expenditures per date, you're on the July 1 biennial budget, not January 1?
Correct. So everything we're, through the chair, Mr. Meyer, Commissioner Meyer, everything that is here is anticipating a biennial year end of June 30th, 2024. And then we'll roll over to the next biennium. So quickly, I will just mention that, again, I always like to project out to that June 30th date. We are projected to spend $231,000 by that June 30th date, which will be under 50% of our initial allocation of $500,000. which means that we project a surplus of $270,000 by the June 30th date. And if we're talking about where we are just now, we've spent $186,000 to date, which leaves us with about $315,000 still in our account. And that's the summary there. The detail on the back, I don't think we really need to touch on because it's all captured, but if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Any questions for the director? Any questions? Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will keep moving forward here. So two quick scheduling items. So our anticipated 18th meeting on September 19th, we had that planned to occur here. However, as of, I believe, early this week or late last week, the University of Wyoming announced they'll be hosting the 7th annual Wyoming Blockchain Stampede at the university in Laramie from September 16th through 20th, and that'll be inclusive of the Monday, Tuesday will also be the Select Committee on Blockchain taking place there. So what I would like to suggest is that we can come to an agreement that we'll move our September 19th meeting. We'll keep the date, we'll keep the time from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Mountain, but we'll relocate the physical meeting from Cheyenne to Laramie.
Are there any objections to doing that, Madam Auditor?
Mr. Chairman, no objection. I do have to be in Cheyenne at noon that day, so I may just need to leave a little early.
Okay, thank you. If there are no objections, I don't know if we need a formal motion. I think we'll just take it on acclamation, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will work with your office to make sure that is rescheduled and relocated appropriately. Moving on to the next one, we had an anticipated October meeting, our 19th meeting, scheduled for October 17th. I subsequently received an email earlier this week that the Jackson Hole Technology Partnership will be hosting their 11th annual Wyoming Global Technology Summit on that date in Jackson. It's an event that I've attended, several of our commissioners have attended, and we might even want to have a speaking role at that event. So my suggestion is that we would move our 19th meeting from October 17th to 1 week later on October 24th, same time, the 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Mountain, and same place here in Cheyenne.
Any concerns with that, members of the commission? Hearing none, I think that's fine.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to keep moving on expeditiously because I see that our guest has arrived. Mr. Land, thank you for joining us this morning. Good to see you. I will quickly run through our stable token industry update, and then for the big update on all things stable coins, I'll turn over to Mr. Land. So first thing I want to mention, just in terms of the size of the market, since our last discussion, aggregate stable token market cap has increased about 5% from $150 billion to $157 billion. So we keep seeing upwards momentum in that capacity. And as of the last 24 hours, trading volume across stable tokens was about $92 billion. In terms of some news around domestic players, one of the things that happened, I think actually the day of our last discussion, was that BlackRock launched its first tokenized fund called the Build Fund. It is on Ethereum, and essentially it is similar to a stable coin. They have tokens that are, when customers invest in that fund, their investment is denominated in a stable coin. BlackRock then takes that cash and invests it in a bucket of securities or basket of securities that look similar to ours, so cash, T-bills, repos, which may be represented on chain. And then BlackRock would then distribute dividends to their investors on a monthly basis using those same stable coins. If you're interested in participating in that, the initial investment minimum is $5 million. And since they launched it, again, just a month ago, they've raised over $245 million in that fund. Related, we are now at a point where over $1 billion in US Treasury notes has been tokenized on public blockchains. About 55% of this is BlackRock's fund as well as Franklin Templeton's funds. So we're seeing a lot of the large financial incumbents get involved in this space as well, but again, for accredited investors, So not exactly the retail model that we would be looking to get into sooner rather than later. Are there any questions on the domestic side of things?
Any questions? Any questions? Very good.
Thank you,
Please
Mr. Chairman.
proceed.
We'll keep moving. Internationally, the SWIFT platform, which is a global bank messaging network, is developing a new platform they expect to launch in the next 1 or 2 years that will connect central bank digital currencies currently in development to the existing financial system. They're doing this in recognition of the fact that about 90% of the world's central banks are now exploring digital versions of their currencies. And a 6-month pilot program with 38 member banks has already been completed. Next up, we have Project Agora. This is through the Bank for International Settlements. They are working with their own collaboration between 7 central banks, France representing the Euro system, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Swiss banks, England, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and private financial firms as well. Their goal is to explore the concept of a unified ledger and assess its ability to integrate tokenized deposits between commercial banks and wholesale central bank platforms. And the BIS is currently recruiting those financial firms at this time. We spoke last month about the Hong Kong Monetary Authority's stable token or stablecoin sandbox. We're now seeing similar activity happening in the United Kingdom. So they have published draft guidance about their own digital security sandbox, which would be used to test products and services based on distributed ledger technology, which they would expect to last for about 5 years. Further, Economic Secretary Bim Alfolami stated that the UK government is preparing to put forward legislation for stablecoins in June or July of this year. Any questions on the international updates?
Any questions? Nope. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in terms of some of the new entrants into the space, so Paxos, which is one of our domestic stable coin issuers, has partnered with a company called Hashnote, which is a asset manager, and they're also integrating Hashnote with PayPal's existing stablecoin to issue a new token called USYC, which is a yield-bearing stablecoin that is USD denominated and only accessible to investors outside the US. Andreessen Horowitz has backed, which is a venture capital firm, has backed a new platform called Angle, which intends to launch a USD-denominated yield-bearing stablecoin called USDA. USDA will only be accessible to investors outside of the United States. And finally, venture capital firm Dragonfly backed a new platform called Agora, which intends to launch a USD-denominated stablecoin called AUSD. AUSD will only be accessible to investors outside of the United States. So there's a bit of a recurring pattern here, which is that we see companies migrating offshore because a perceived lack of regulatory environment with which they can comply. And I think this is a perfect time to turn it over, unless there's any questions, of course, on those new entrants in the space. This is a great time to turn it over to Mr. Chris Land, who is the General Counsel in Senator Lummis's office, to talk about one of the key pieces of legislation that's now been put forward in the United States around stable tokens and stable coins, which is the Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stablecoin Act. So, Mr. Land, I think we could, unless again, there's any questions on some of these
I'll
entrants.
ask briefly if there's any questions or any color. I don't know, Joel or Flavia, if you commissioners have any particular comments to make.
Nothing at the moment, Governor. I think Chris is going to walk us through, I think, what is the biggest piece of news happening, which is very exciting. But the summary that Anthony gave, and actually his last remarks about, some of these businesses going offshore, it's comprehensive. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Nothing from me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please, that would be great. It's great to see Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I proceed?
Please.
All right. Thank you, Governor, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning in Washington, D.C. As Director Apollo mentioned, Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand introduced their Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stablecoin Act yesterday. We've been working on this since about October. Got a lot of feedback from the White House, the Treasury, the Fed, other stakeholders in Congress, and we were able to roll that out. seen as kind of the Senate product on stablecoins. Chairman McHenry and Ranking Member Waters over on the House Financial Services Committee are finishing up their House stablecoin proposal at the moment, and I'm hopeful in the next few weeks that we'll see that proposal emerge from the House, and then we'll begin working on earnest on putting the two products together. There's some thinking that we may be able to attach stablecoin legislation to the FAA reauthorization in May. It's probably looking more likely to be later in the year, perhaps in the lame duck session after the election in November. But I would say there's a reasonably good chance we will see stablecoin legislation proceed. But like I always say, I would never bet on any bill passing Congress, because we can barely even keep the government open at times. So, I wouldn't make plans either way. I will say that, this effort's backed by the White House and the leadership of both parties in both houses. So we have a great deal of political buy-in, that we need to get this across the line. From a policy perspective, the legislation is very focused on the dual banking system, which is very, very, very important to the state of Wyoming. And Commissioner Bishop and myself personally, from my past service at the Division of Banking, it would enable the state to continue to issue the stable token, but there would need to be a partner with a depository institution or a trust company. The SPDI would have more legal heft under the Lemus-Gillard-Brand Payment Stablecoin Act. And it would reduce some of the regulatory friction we're seeing right now with the federal agencies and other states. So it would be a big win for Wyoming if we're able to get this across the line. There are a lot of requirements in the bill around stablecoin reserves. It's mostly limited to treasuries and central bank deposits. It's also, there's a $10 billion threshold where if the stable token were to go above $10 billion, there would need to be a depository institution involved. But if it's less than $10 billion, it would only need to be a trust company. Let's see, there's a lot on receivership in the bill that's focused on, preserving confidence in stable tokens, no matter what their issuer is. And that's pretty much it. Just from a policy perspective, I'll emphasize again that Senator Lummis is very focused on, ensuring Wyoming's leadership in this area is maintained, and that we're able to build on the great work that the Stable Token Commission and the legislature has done the last few years, and building up Wyoming, getting some good paying jobs into Wyoming in this space, and continuing to preserve Wyoming's lead in crypto asset regulation. Folks around DC, because of Senator Lummis and the work of this commission, know Wyoming is a thoughtful leader in the space, and we're hopeful we can continue to only build Wyoming's profile nationally. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to stand for any questions or touch on areas that I may have missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just take a privilege just to start with. You and I have talked about the reluctance of FDIC to let banks proceed in doing this. And in fact, I think you helped me get a conversation with one of the commissioners at one point who also shared that perspective. Has there been a change of heart with the FDIC? Because I guess I am concerned that's one of the big obstacles we have here in Wyoming, to be able to partner with a bank.
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I would say the FDIC's role in Senator Lummis's legislation is only after receivership. If there were to be a failure of a stablecoin issuer, they wouldn't be involved on the front end. The Federal Reserve, which is all of our favorites at the moment for a lot of obvious reasons, would be involved on the front end. We're very focused on limiting their discretion and decision-making points in every way possible, to make sure that their enormous authority is not abused in ways that we've seen over the last few years that are probably contrary to statute. That being said, all the federal banking agencies are kind of very, very skeptical of this asset class. So there is some risk, but we have to make the best out of a tough situation. But I will say that Senator Lummis's legislation is mainly focused on finding ways that we can cabin in their discretion. For example, on the trust company side, the application's presumed to be approved unless 2/3 of the board votes to deny, the Board of Governors. And then for existing issuers, like the Wyoming stable token, there has to be unanimous denial. There's a unanimous denial threshold. The entire Board of Governors would have to vote to deny the Wyoming stable token for it to get rejected. And unanimous is a pretty high threshold that I think we've done everything we can in that space.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Treasurer.
you know, I noticed just the very start of the bill, it says that the logarithmic payment stable coin. And that, going to the next page, it essentially, it's the same old thing, is that they're gonna limit the amount of coins to guarantee that the value is gonna stay stable. And, you know, it seems like that's not a stable coin to me. You might say it is a stable coin, but when you have a logarithmic in there, and I don't know if it goes in there and says that every logarithmic coin has to be banked dollar for dollar with the U.S. Treasury, you know, then it's not a logarithmic stable coin. So I'm trying to
Exactly.
understand why it's even there.
Mr. Chairman, Treasurer Meyer, I think my boss agrees that, you know, algorithmic stablecoins present a number of challenges, and they aren't really stable tokens of the kind that Wyoming's trying to issue. I don't think anything that the Stable Token Commission is up to in Wyoming will be impacted by that. There is a prescription on issuance in the bill of algorithmic stablecoins. I don't expect that to be the final product in, you know, the legislation that goes to the president's desk. I think there'll be some kind of moratorium or classification that makes it more difficult to issue. But I think Senator Lummis shares your concern about algorithmic stablecoins and, you know, their stability and consumer protection issues.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
You know, the thing that kind of really bothers me is that it's called a stable coin in the first place, because we could have a stable coin that's actually stable, it's backed one for one. And then you have another I guess instrument that's called a stable coin, and it goes broke like some of these logarithmic coins have. But because they're both stable coins, it paints us with the same brush. And
That is great feedback, and I will make a note of that. And, you know, like I said, we have an opportunity to make some further clarifications in the next version of the draft that's actually the deal. So like, maybe I'll ask Senator Lummis if it might make sense to kind of take out the word stablecoin from the algorithmic piece.
yeah, just say coin, you know, it's a logarithmic coin, and then we don't get, there's no confusion.
Okay, I appreciate that. We'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through the chair. Mr. Land, just to follow up on the comment about the algorithmic stablecoins, the issuance of which, for clarity, I understand to be prohibited as proposed by this piece of legislation. For existing algorithmic stable coins or coins that do exist, is there a method in which they could become compliant, or in any way, shape, or form continue to exist and be traded on domestic platforms or exchanges?
Thank you, Director Apollo, Mr. Chairman. I think that it would be difficult, especially the trading piece. There is a provision in the bill that allows the board to make certain exceptions to the rules through a sandbox, kind of like Wyoming has a pilot program. The board would have to do that by rule, though. The Board of Governors would have to do that by rule.
Thank you. Further questions?
I have a question, Governor.
Please proceed, Commissioner Naves.
Thank you. So Chris, I haven't had a chance to read the bill, but I will later today. Talk to us a little bit about preemption of existing coins, stable coins, fiat-backed stable coins. I like Kurt's comment because to me, fiat-backed stable coins are very different than algorithm-backed tokens. Yes, I call them tokens, not stable coins. But in any event, fiat-backed stable coins, talk to me a little bit about preemption of existing tokens and or potentially a grace period to come into compliance, because we do have obviously some domestic issuers in the market that are licensed by other entities, state entities, and we may have the Wyoming stable token in circulation prior to charters or a licensing regime existing for this bill. So talk to us a little bit about how that will work.
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner. There is extensive transitional and grandfathering provisions at the end of the bill. I would take a look at section 15 of the bill. It's all the way at the end. It's a long bill. It's about page 175, I think, in the legislation. Basically, if you're an existing issuer, the Board of Governors has to vote unanimously that you can't come into compliance within 2.5 years of the enactment date of the act. So there's a 2.5 year grandfathering period, which the board will be writing rules and working with the existing issuers. So in that 2.5, at the end of that 2.5 period, the board would have to vote unanimously that there's no way you can come into compliance with the act, which is a very, very high threshold. So there's a 1.5 year period before the act actually comes into force when the board will be doing the rule writing. And then there's another year period after that initial 1.5 year period where the existing issuers will get their affairs in order so that they can be compliant with the act. That the grandfathering provision would apply to the Wyoming stable token, and it would also apply to whatever path, trust company or depository institution path that the commission, chose to proceed under for a partnership with an issuer or an existing trust company or depository institution. So there are significant protections for existing issuers in the bill.
Thank you, Chris. Again, I will be reading that bill carefully, but is the consideration that any issuer, be it a private entity or a public body, will be subject to the statute in the same way, or different rules that apply to different issuers?
There are different rules for issuers that have approval before May 1st, 2024. But there's no distinction between private or public issuers.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are my questions, Governor.
Thank you, Commissioner Naves. Just follow up a little bit on that, Chris. I guess I'm particularly anxious about how this is crafted. In the definition, it refers to the Board of Governors. That would be the Federal Reserve, and you're talking about the governors that are politically appointed, or are you talking about the full board or just the voting members of the whatever that subcommittee is?
Yeah, the FOMC governor, I think, is what you're talking about. The Open Market Committee. Yeah, this would just be the 7 politically appointed members of the Board of Governors, not the Reserve Bank presidents like Eric Schmidt from Kansas City. Yeah, it would just be the Board of Governors. The Reserve Bank presidents, their legal status as voting members or officers of the United States is the subject of litigation in a Wyoming court and the 10th Circuit at the moment. So we're going to have more clarity on what their legal authority is soon, hopefully.
And just for the record,
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve System of the United States is the only distributed system. And if you look back on sort of the history of it, New York has always exerted a particular influence on the Board of Governors. And And you know, I guess I've mentioned this to Senator Lummis over and over again. It does feel to me that the political process results in a very centralized approach. If you look back at Commissioner Trullo, for example, no community bank was safe under Commissioner Trullo, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it was really the regional banks that kind of carried the water. So I just caution against too much centralization. And I know that there is a temptation in Washington to fix things by being more Washington. And in fact, I think the problem there is that when you have actions like we need to have more consumer protection on the regional banks, when, you know, frankly, that's exactly what their job is, probably more so than consumers. I caution against trying to centralize too much to DC.
Governor, I think Senator Lummis and I couldn't agree with you more wholeheartedly. You know, some of the materials that have been revealed in the custodial litigation have, you know, evidenced a high degree of centralization and control over the reserve banks by the Board of Governors. And, you know, that's an issue that will continue to evolve. Senator Lummis is very focused on making reforms to the Fed. I'm going to be preparing some legislation for her this summer to fundamentally restructure the Federal Reserve System and to distribute more power back to the reserve banks and limit the board's authority. As far as stablecoin legislation, the best we can possibly hope for is to limit the board's authority and to build in safeguards that they really can't act beyond the bounds of the law in certain ways. And that's why we've grandfathered in the existing issuers and set the denial threshold at unanimous and set a really high legal standard. But I could not agree with you more. There's a massive wave of centralization that's happening right now, and it is materially disadvantaging the Kansas City Fed, you know, our community banks in the 10th district and other rural states. And I'm very concerned about what community banking looks like in 10 years.
Me as well. So, and I'll just make the statement, figuring out how to rotate New York off the regular vote would be a great remedy in some ways.
We'll get that. We'll get that in the legislation.
I digress. I apologize. Any further questions? Yes.
Joe has a question,
Okay,
Governor.
Joel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, thanks for your comments. And I guess it was all of our hope that federal legislation would help what we're trying to do and clarify a pathway forward for us. But my fear is that could potentially actually create a more difficult time for us to move forward with the Wyoming stable token if there is the power to prevent partners from working with us. Am I thinking about that the right way, do you think, Mr. Land, or am I misguided in that initial reaction?
No, it's a 100% valid concern. I share that concern too. You know, if we could put another agency leading this other than the Fed, I think Senator Lummis would. Unfortunately, the other agencies have their own political baggage and issues too. Yeah, I'm concerned about it, but I will say that there are many advantages in Senator Lummis's legislation that, in her opinion, outweigh the potential risks in, you know, building in Wyoming's leadership in the crypto asset space into federal law in ways that isn't currently the case, and limiting the Fed's discretion in a lot of ways that will be helpful. But, you know, anytime federal legislation is implemented, it's always a little uncertain. But I've thought a lot about the math along with Senator Lummis, and I'm reasonably confident the math works out in Wyoming's favor at the moment. And if Senator Lummis detects that, you know, the math has gone the other way and it, you know, probably is too much of a risk, then I'm very confident that Senator Lummis will help block or defeat legislation that works against Wyoming's interest. You know, we have a motto around our office that Senator Lummis is all Wyoming all the time. And, you know, we are all laser focused on, you know, helping Wyoming, you know, get the stable token up and running, getting real economic development into the state, and building on Wyoming's leadership in the crypto asset space. And, you know, if anything, you know, if it's likely that anything that's moving in Congress hurts that, we will jump all over it.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, if I could, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Land. I just wanted to build on the question that Commissioner Navas asked earlier about the grandfather provision. Could you just help us there with a little bit more detail on specifically what that might enable us to do? And then as part of that, what we need to do in order to ensure that we have that grandfathered status?
Yeah, well, there's nothing that needs to be done because the Wyoming legislature has passed a law that authorized the issuance of a stable token before May 1st, 2024. That's already kind of in progress. So the legal box has been checked in our opinion. There will just need to be there'll be a 2.5-year runway when this finally goes into effect, signed by the president, for the state to partner up with a trust company or depository institution to start issuing the stable token. And then the board will have very limited ability to deny the state of Wyoming's stable token at that point. But the legal authority has already been granted by the Wyoming legislature to this commission to issue the token. So I don't see any concerns there. Just getting that legal authority and that approval before May 1st is the big key.
A question. You know, I think we're all on board of, you know your customer and AML, but I'm wondering, is there anything in this bill that requires the Wyoming stable token to keep track of its citizens and all the transactions? And, you know, there's a line there that of privacy that it seems like the federal government wants to continue to step over. And I didn't know if there's anything in there that actually said they could step over anytime they want to and keep track of every purchase and have the same data collection as a credit card company or a social media company and get to know everything that every citizen is doing. So is there any protection at all in this situation going forward on the federal level?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Treasurer Meyer, and Senator Lummis is very concerned, like you are, about privacy in the crypto asset space and in the financial industry today. She's going to be fighting the FISA reauthorization, you know, today and tomorrow on those similar privacy grounds. I'd encourage everyone to watch the debate. It's going to be great. The provisions in the bill largely make applicable the same laws and regulations that apply to banks today around the Bank Secrecy Act. To stable token issuers, they would be classified as financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act. Commissioner Navas can give you more, you know, context about what that obligation means, but I would say that this bill doesn't place any greater burden on, you know, on privacy than, you know, is currently kind of already exists today. And further to your point about privacy, my boss is very concerned about a central bank digital currency, and she sees the Wyoming stable token and stable coins as CBDC killers. It'll make the need for a surveillance heavy CBDC a lot less necessary and a lot less likely to happen if we have a properly regulated stable coin that's, you know, in private hands. So.
All right. Well, I share that view. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Revelle, I didn't know if you had any further follow-up. Otherwise, I will go to the director for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No further follow-up.
All right, thank you. Please, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, I wanted to just piggyback on Commissioner Meyer's question regarding privacy. One of the acts that is noted as being in scope in this in the bill is the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act around the privacy of customer data when it's maintained by banks. Could you give just a little bit more color as to how that comes into play in the current design of the payment stablecoin issuers? Thank you.
Thank you, Director, Mr. Chairman. This is a very important customer protection provision that's in the bill. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act is a provision of federal law that basically places heavy restrictions on the abilities of financial institutions to sell your data to big tech companies and, you know, other people who are interested to know what kind of things you're buying and to use your personal data to mine for profit. So Senator Lummis's legislation would merely place the same restrictions on selling on people's personal data and violating their privacy on stablecoin issuers that exist for banks today. So it will be very protective of privacy.
Thank you. Further questions? Director.
Mr. Chairman, I have two quick ones, and I am only hogging time because I've spent a lot of time reading through this, which is nothing compared to what Mr. Land and his team have done to put it together.
Right.
But I do want to follow up on two more specifics regarding reserves composition. Again, I think what's proposed in the act is similar to what we've talked about: cash, treasuries, repos. One thing I wanted to kind of double click on, I know this is a very, perhaps a pedantic question, is repurchase agreements and reverse repurchase agreements. One of the things that came up during our discussion with the Select Committee in November when they put forward amendments to the Stable Token Act was we did increase the scope of types of investments we're allowed to make, you know, cash, U.S. Treasuries, and repurchase agreements. During that discussion, the repurchase versus reverse repurchase conversation came up. And I do believe that, if I'm recalling correctly, and we could go back to the video on this if we need to, that the position of the Treasurer's Office was the term repurchase agreement was also intended to include reverse repurchase agreements. Would that be the same understanding in this act? Because I think repurchase agreements are called out, reverse repos are not. And I'm curious as to whether the term is meant to be broadly encompassing of reverse repos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Apollo, we're gonna need to consult with some folks on this. I think it could possibly go either way, to be honest. We've had a lot of discussion about reverse repos, and I'm gonna need to consult with our team of experts and get back to you on that.
Very good. One more.
Just one
Please,
more,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. And then I think, Chris, I know we came on the fly. We'll take no more than half an hour of your time, hopefully. But, and thank you for the context on that, because I think whatever you determine in your own investigations into that will impact perhaps, you know, complying amendment on our own Stable Token Act when we get there. So thank you for that. Last question I had, and this kind of goes back to the question around algorithmic stable tokens. We're also seeing more and more asset-backed stable tokens, or what they refer to as real-world assets, or RWAs, moving on chain. Would the assumption be that any, similar to algorithmically pegged stable coins, or maybe perhaps just coins, would the expectation be that any token backed by RWAs or a different basket of assets would also need to move into compliance with this act?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Apollo, I would be very strongly. I have a very strong belief that they would not have to comply. They would be considered commodities and not within the scope of the act. The definition of algorithmic stablecoin is very, very prescriptive, and I'm not sure it would meet that definition. So I just think they would be considered ordinary crypto assets that are commodities.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Any other questions for Mr. Land? Commissioner Poe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of, or just one observation. Section 3 requires apparently stablecoins be redeemed within 1 day of a customer request. I believe our legislation allows us up to 2 weeks. That is probably just just something that we will have to be aware of if this passes. I think it may change our requirements.
Um, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Commissioner Pope. No, happy to chat more about this. The thinking from Senator Lummis was that if we really want this to be used as a means of payment, it needs to be treated like a means of payment and, be freely liquid and allow people to, get their money whenever they need it. So, but I'm happy to chat more about that and, how we could potentially bridge the gap between, the 2-week requirement and the 1-day requirement.
Let me have a follow-up from Commissioner Pope and then Treasurer you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, thank you again. I also noticed in a quick read through that the term audit only appears once in the document. There is regular reporting required, but it does not, it only defines that reporting in one area, and that's, I believe, in respect to a subsidiary of a holding institution or depository institution that where the subsidiary issues the stable token. All other reporting requirements to customers and all of that, would the enforcement of that then fall to the state banking commissions around the nation? Please help me with that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Pope. Yes, there are heavy examination requirements, and like anytime you see the word examination in the bill, you should, that's pretty much an audit. That's just bank regulator speak. But the Wyoming Division of Banking will be responsible for the asset verification and confirming the audit reports and all the stuff that we would expect from a normal financial institution.
And yep, please, Commissioner Pope.
One final, and I know I'm probably getting into the weeds on this, but also, as we've seen with other stable coin issuers, there's a fluctuation in market values, and there are certain occasions in which the stable coins have become depegged to the dollar, even only briefly. As those flows above and below the dollar market value happen, I guess I'm trying to get my arms around around who would monitor that. Again, the only time audited financial statements is mentioned are on an annual basis. So let me know just briefly some of the thinking around how that would be monitored and regulated.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Pope, depegging is a serious contingency in the context of a stable coin. It's supposed to be stable. So the bill requires that stablecoin issuers report to the regulator if there is a material depegging event, and there would be appropriate remedial action taken by the regulator at that point. There are plenty of, market services like coinmarketcap.com and, folks that monitor, the relative value of the stable coins. I think it would become public quite immediately if there was a market event that caused the depegging. This is an eventuality we have to avoid in the context of every regulated stable coin. So it would just be incumbent on the issuer and the regulator to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Meyer.
Going back to this 1-day payment, our custodial banks are just implementing, I think, the 1-day payment now in settlements. And there's a lot of times when you have settlements that are going to extend past that. And I'm not sure what the day settlement thing is for banks. There's a lot of times when you give a bank deposit and you won't have settlement for, could be for a lot longer than a day. I remember during the GFC, it took, I think, almost a month to get Wells Fargo investment money into Wells Fargo. So, I think whatever day period, I think as long as it's it's customary in the industry, but realize that you're going to have to have settlement and you're going to and so that might take in some circumstances more than that day just to get your treasuries in and out. So just depending on different economic conditions and different conditions. So we want to have I think something that's usual and customary, but understand that there are some limitations to just saying it's going to be a day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Treasurer Meyer, no, I completely understand that, and that makes a lot of sense. I think we have to balance a lot of issues, for stablecoins to really be used as payments, they have to be liquid and, pretty much redeemable on demand like deposits or cash are. But we have to thread the needle about settlement because a lot of things like our custodial system and wires and SWIFT are antiquated and they don't settle as fast. I will say the Fed has created FedNow, which is supposed to be a more or less real-time payment settlement system. And this is another reason why it's important for stablecoin issuers to have access to the central bank so that they can settle in real time and not create more risk in the system with a chain of settlement between one bank going to another bank, going to the Fed, and then going to another bank. That just takes a lot of time. So there's a lot of risk built up in the settlement system that way. We need to continue to talk, I think, about the redemption period because I do think you've spotted a good issue that we need to talk more about.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just I want to respond on this, the timeliness of the payments as well, because I do not believe it is in the statute that we have a 2-week period. I just flipped through it. Perhaps I missed it, but I do recall, Commissioner Naves, that you and I talked about this in November ahead of the Select Committee and with the Select Committee, that perhaps it was worthwhile to put a 2-business day redemption period into the statute. I think the outcome of those discussions would be that that's something that we could put into policy rather than statute. But again, perhaps it bears reinvestigating on our side at this time based on what we're seeing in the act. And Commissioner Naves, if you have any other feedback, I would invite you to correct me.
No, I'm not correcting you at all because I have raised my hand exactly to make that point, Anthony, that to my understanding, there's statutory requirement for Wyoming to redeem in 2 weeks. I may have missed again. If there's somewhere else, please advise. But I completely agree with Chris's comment that for this token to be successful, expectation of redemption needs to be very prompt, if not daily, T+2 max. Otherwise, we are just functioning as other rails are today, and it's not going to be a comparable and successful offering.
Very good. Well, Chris, I really want to thank you for making yourself available to walk through the bill. I'll ask one more if there are any further questions, but I know we've taken an enormous amount of your time. Thank you so much for your generosity. If there are no further questions, very, very much appreciate you and good luck. And thank your boss and your staff, colleagues for the great work you're doing for Wyoming.
Thank you, Governor and Commissioners. It was a pleasure to testify. And if anyone has any questions or anything Senator Lummis or I can do, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we're going to keep fighting for Wyoming in the swamp, and we're going to do our best. So thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks. Very good. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to thank Mr. Land for his time. That came together very late last night and early this morning. So I appreciate him going live with us and coming into the lion's den here. So with that being said, if there's any other questions on the act itself, I have reviewed it. I think we've gotten through most of the context around it, but I also want to avail myself as a resource if there's any questions about it. Happy to dig through the details with any of the commissioners.
Yeah, and Director, it strikes me this is very fresh and it's pretty lengthy. At a future meeting, this might be good to kind of walk through what the implications are. And I'm sure that Commissioner Naves and others will have a chance to look at it also. I'm thrilled that there are the grandfathering aspects to this, but I'm also thrilled that, there's finally some movement that we can kind of look at to help inform us as we work our way through this. Anything more on that topic? If
Mr.
there is, Commissioner Pope.
I may have been looking at one of the first drafts of the legislation, so I apologize, but I will go back and confirm that there is not a 2-week requirement. So my apologies if I spoke out of turn on that.
No worries, no worries. Well, very good. Director, I think, is there anything more on industry update?
Mr. Chairman, not from my side. I'm happy to move on from the industry update and the Payment Stablecoin Act onto our next topic.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our next topic is job content questionnaires. In your folders and in the commissioner files on Drive, you have 5 different, we refer to as JCQs, job content questionnaires. Again, we initially drafted these during the JAC when we were putting our budget together and our exception request. And we, made these part of that process. However, we are at a point now where we do expect again to have remaining budget for this biennium. And following the signing of the budget bill, we do expect to receive $5.8 million in funding for the budget year of 2025. So that would start July 1st of 2024 and take us out to June 30th of 2026. As much fun as I've had in this role as a solo resource, I think it would be fantastic to get some other resources on board. And I do think that we're going to need some people with specific expertise in different sectors. So the 5 JCQs you have in front of you are one for an executive director. We'll come back to that at the top. We have a senior business project management analyst, which would be almost like a second in command. This would be someone who could help us not only with the work that's happening now around putting together timelines, roadmaps, task lists, and helping with the operational side of things, but also someone as we would hope that this commission would grow in time to encompass perhaps many types of digital assets. This is someone who could be here from the early days to help us move forward on that. And we could certainly dig into that. Next would be, it's referred to as a accounting manager 3, but this would be a chief financial officer, someone to help us not only with budgeting, projections, but also compliance and reporting. And then we've got a chief risk and compliance officer. Obviously, as we just experienced, the regulatory environment is moving rapidly, both domestically and internationally. Having someone on board who could help us with, understand those regulations as they are proposed and also assess the impact that it would have on the Wyoming stable token. That's that role. And then a chief information security officer. Obviously, this will be a tech-heavy project. We need someone on board who can, talk the talk when it comes to not only the specific technical elements and putting we refer to as the tech stack together, perhaps, for example, integrating multiple platforms, but this is also partially a policy role as well, understanding what privacy regulations we may have to comply with again, domestically, things like GDPR, if we have a stable token circulating overseas, and all of that. So I'm happy to dive into these in a bit more detail, but I want to come back to the top because the executive director role is my current role, and all of these roles, I should mention before we dig back in, would be considered at-will employee contracts. So we don't have full-time resources, we don't have part-time resources. These are all considered to be contractors, myself included. The contract I'm currently on ends on June 30th as a result of the biennium and would need to be re-upped for the subsequent biennium. So at this point in time, if there would be discussion around approving this role, I think it may be time for an executive session of the commission to discuss how that would proceed. But if you want me to provide more color here first, I'm happy to do so.
What's the pleasure of the commission? My own view is that we can walk through these JCQs if there are questions, et cetera, and then I would suggest that perhaps then we visit an executive session briefly before we move on. Does that square with you?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So we'll walk through these one by one. So again, the first one you have in front of you is for the executive director position. Again, this is someone who's responsible for directing and supporting all administrative operations within the commission, implementing the business plan, ensuring compliance with the Stable Token Act and any other domestic regulations, state laws, federal laws, and everything in between, budget management, industry monitoring, risk management, so on and so forth. The description of duties and the time allocation would include strategic development and delivery, which is actually putting the token together and working to get that deployed. Risk management, you're keeping an eye on everything from what's happening in the technology space, things like hacks that might be happening, to other digital asset projects, to what's happening on the finance side. If we see, for example, interest rates moving rapidly, we monitor things like that. Personnel management, this role would be overseeing all of the employees of the Stable Token Commission, and also would have some insight into what the vendors would be working on as well that we intend to work with. Commission administration, this is essentially these discussions that we have, taking the feedback, presenting materials here, taking the feedback, and working on those next steps. Compliance, we talked about that a little already. Reporting, making sure that anything that needs to be reported to the commission gets done, to the select committee gets done, to JAC or any other committees. We take the lead on that, or this role takes the lead on that. And then the budget management piece is, again, similar to what we've been doing now, making sure that we're tracking where the dollars are going and that we are not spending more than we should be spending at any given time. And finally, industry monitoring, you'll see this across all of them. The goal here is that really anyone on our team should be highly informed of what's happening in the space, given how fast it moves. If you move on to the supervisory responsibilities, this role would be in charge of overseeing all of the other AWEC contractors. So that would be the CRCO, the CISO, the CFO, and the project manager. In terms of the work direction, the executive director would have the responsibility of overseeing pretty much everyone. So again, those resources internally, but also any of the external vendors, which would be across legal, technology, and finance verticals. Again, we have here, it asks for what level of supervision and work direction is this role responsible for. Complete supervision is what I've checked off here. The role is responsible for setting, controlling a budget. The budget is in the $5 million to $10 million range. Again, I've just synced that up with the budget request that we've gotten approved. And now we move into authority. So this position is expected to handle really any day-to-day operations of the commission. And then in terms of what the executive director could not approve is anything that I would view as the purview of the commission itself. So voting on rules, policies, and procedures, actually voting to extend employment or vendor contracts to different groups, selection of a blockchain, et cetera. So anything that would be deferred to the commission itself would be outside the purview of the executive director. Challenges, I think the challenges are pretty much standard across the board. We're going to continue forward momentum in the face of daily new challenges while remaining in compliance with federal and state regulations as applicable. Again, really, this is high level. This is where we're building a foundation on shifting sands here. So anyone who's involved with this needs to understand that. And the most complex challenges would be creating a world-first financial product on top of emerging technology, which is not exactly well understood, in a highly regulated environment with rules that are subject to change, monitored by federal agencies, which may have adversarial perspectives on digital assets, and Wyoming's reputation is in play. That's the most complex challenge. And then in terms of the educational certifications and licensing, I put NA here. That is what was actually on the listing for the role previously. Of course, if there's any different opinions there, I'm happy to include something here. But in terms of knowledge and competencies, subject matter expertise, so understanding deeply what this blockchain space and digital asset space is about, understanding the financial services and regulation, understanding government and legislative engagement, understanding the technical side of things, the ability to communicate well, the understanding of the legal and regulatory landscape, and strong ethical standards. And that is the executive director position. Any questions on that? Or if you need me to be a bit more high level with these, happy to fly a few feet up.
Commissioner Meyer.
One of the things that we do in ours, we have kind of a catch-all that would say any other duties that would be assigned by the commission. I mean, you've pretty much, I think, hit everything we could possibly understand, but just in case there is. And then on the same things on the other people that are under you, any other duties as determined by the director. So there might be something there that's not here, or as things change and evolve, then somebody may have more or less a little bit, something different. So that's just a catch-all, so you know that you have that wiggle room.
Okay, and Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the comment, Commissioner Meyer. I've jotted that down. So moving on to the next one, this is the Senior Business Project Management Analyst, which we might just refer to as the project manager. This is someone who supports the Stable Token Commission and the Executive Director by helping facilitate the day-to-day operations of the agency. This would include everything from tracking and reporting project status, managing stakeholders, both internally and externally, so vendors we might partner with, helping triage inbound tasks that may impact scope and/or timelines. Ideal candidates will have hands-on experience with the blockchain industry, coupled with familiarity of Wyoming's digital asset initiatives. Duties will include project planning and tracking. So again, there's a lot of moving parts here. This role will be responsible for creating a rubric or framework that may or may not be public to put it all together and track that in real time. We expect them to be an excellent communicator, to perform process documentation. So as we're building all of this on the fly, this is someone who can help jot down the necessary steps for, let's say, a granular procedure, right? Because we've got statute, we've got rules, policies, procedures. The hope here is that we would be able to document our procedures along the way as we're building them out. That way we have a very repeatable process to deploy. I'd also like to see this role, this is stable token extensibility, this role do spend a little bit of their time, about 5% of their time, researching other ways to get a stable token in circulation. As an example, a lot of the conversations I've had through my discussions have been with platforms that may do payroll processing on a global basis, and they could use stable tokens for that, and really exploring new use cases that we can get a stable token involved with to maximize our utilization. Helping with meeting preparation, so these discussions and others with the select committee or JAC, helping put materials together for that. And again, industry monitoring will be a significant portion of, or decent portion of their responsibilities as well. Flipping over to supervisory responsibilities, they would not have any supervisory responsibilities. Again, that is for internal resources. We skip over to work direction, where this would include non-employees, i.e. external contractors. They would certainly have oversight into everyone we would be working with, because we'd expect that this role would be helping put all the different tasks together amongst any number of teams. Again, legal providers, technology, finance, operations, maybe even marketing comes into play at some point there. They do not oversee employees. This next section is blank. In the terms of the budgetary responsibility, they do not have any budgetary responsibility, so the next section after that is blank. In terms of authority, this resource would be able to do general internal and external communications, setting meetings, performing outreach, adjusting timelines and project plans as agreed upon, really any of that kind of tactical work they don't need any kind of approvals for. Anything beyond that would either need to go through the executive director or the commission. The challenges, again, are the same. Working to build this in a shifting environment. In terms of complex problems or challenges, this is someone who, with a lack of direction from the commission or the director in any given situation, will need to make informed decisions about their work or their choices and be able to justify that if they ever get asked about it. In terms of education and licensing, the expectation would be like a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, 3 to 5 years of experience, hands-on in project management, hands-on experience with digital assets, and the hope would be this role is based in Cheyenne. So we have a way of working together. They would be able to work together closely with the executive director. In terms of skills, subject matter familiarity, again, knows the blockchain space. They have a good track record of project delivery in program management specifically, again, effective communications, taking initiative, right? There's no shortage of moving pieces with this. So if they see something that the executive director or others may not be able to triage or handle in time, they could take it up and run with it. Third-party management, again, the expectation is this person be working closely with the vendors we look to source. Familiarity with different workflow tools, which maybe Drive, Notion, Asana, et cetera. And again, strong ethical standards. Are there any questions on the Senior Business Project Management Analyst?
Questions? Hearing none, go ahead, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to the next one. This is a Accounting Manager 3, which again is kind of tied to the Human Resources Department's classifications. We may just refer to this person as the Chief Financial Officer. Before diving in here, I do want to make one quick point. CFO role is something we're pursuing actively. If there is a need for another kind of accounting role, whether it's a controller or just a staff accountant, we do not have a JCQ for that. We did not draft that as something that would be in the 100 series of our budget, which are AWAC employees, essentially full-time people. However, when we put the JAC budget together, we did carve out a role for, generally speaking, attestation on the 900 series on the vendor side. If we wanted to bring in a controller, we would be able to use that allocation of funding, which I believe is about $100,000 a year, so $200K in total for the biennium, to apply to that role should we need it. I just want to be specific about that because I have had that conversation with the Treasurer's Office about an extra resource. Commissioner Pope, you and I spoke about that briefly. So that is something we have the ability to do, which is not one of the roles that's in front of us right now. And I would just quickly pause for questions if either of you had questions on that.
Comments, questions? Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick comment, as we build the control environment, which will have to be robust, a controller position is probably more appropriate for that, given the different requirements between that and a chief financial officer. I suppose you could find someone that would have the expertise in both areas possibly, but again, I think the control environment itself is going to have to be robust and actively instituted and managed by someone with that particular expertise.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, thank you for the comment. What I would say about that is it's generally an agreement. I think the reason why we don't have a JCQ in front of us for that role right now is because there's a bit of a determination to be made. I think this is further down the vendor conversations and we go through perhaps the pre-qualification piece, which is we've certainly talked to larger accounting and advisory firms along the way. If we were to work with one of those firms, they have independence requirements that would say, if you do advisory work, you can do accounting work and vice versa. So if we wanted to hypothetically engage one of those partners to help us build a control environment out proactively, that is certainly one of the many permutations of how this could be carried forward. Just wanted to throw that out there as a general comment. So perhaps, again, this is something that we do go on the vendor side for and build it out proactively rather than reactively.
Very good. Thanks. Further questions, comments? All right, thank you. Final?
Back to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the Chief Financial Officer, they will be responsible for overseeing all elements of the Wyoming stable tokens financial operations. This will include managing the budget, performing budget to actual analysis, deriving financial projections based on demand and prevailing interest rates. Designing and implementing internal controls did sneak in here. Perhaps we can assess that. Coordinate with counterparties for reserve management, audit attestation, and consolidation of the agency's financials into the state's annual comprehensive financial report. And of course, they'll be aware of all domestic regulations that are in play and familiar with GASB, which is the accounting standards we expect to have to follow. In terms of their duties, financial strategy and planning is the first one here. This is where we take a long-tailed view at how we expect the stable token to roll out, the investment strategies therein, and risk management. We would expect that in this capacity, they would work pretty closely with the Treasurer's Office. Regulatory compliance and reporting. This is, again, compliance with relevant laws and regulations that may include KYC or AML and anything else that comes into our scope as we derive the token's design. Budget tracking distributions is fairly self-explanatory. Portfolio oversight is, again, coordinating with the Treasurer's Office or an external third-party manager to review the portfolio of underlying securities that back the token and making sure that we have a sufficiently liquid platform, make sure we are availing ourselves of the best interest rates possible, and keeping an eye on how a changing interest rate environment may impact us, the commission, and the stable token in any way. Risk management will be a key piece of this as well. Liquidity and treasury management, performing frequent reviews of liquidity needs based on trailing averages of stable token redemption is on here. Then we have reporting. So again, any reports that need to be generated for the commission or any other agency, and industry monitoring is on here as well. In terms of supervisory responsibilities, I would not expect this role to oversee any employees. Again, if we bring in a controller, perhaps that is the case. But for now, none. For work direction, yes, they would oversee two different positions, which would be the finance vendors that we expect to have. So one, the firm that would be managing the reserves, and two would be the firm that is actually helping us perform the audit of the agency and its underlying reserves. The next section is blank because they don't oversee any employees. The budgetary responsibility of this position would be responsible for setting and controlling the budget, and I've tacked that, I believe, to the 5 million to 10 million role, again, based on our budget. I put a hole through mine, so I couldn't tell you. The authority piece here, what they would be able to do is draft finance policies for the agency, coordinate and correspond with third-party vendors as relevant, facilitate financial reviews and performing remediation, preparing and presenting financial statements, similar to any other role in the next two we'll talk about. Their authority kind of ends when the commission or other agencies step in. So rules, policies, hiring decisions, the overall budget that would go through the JAC and the legislative process, all of those would be outside their purview, but they would certainly be feeding information into that process. In terms of challenges, again, typical problem is just the day-to-day. In terms of the most complex problems, that's really going to focus on developing our own internal practices as domestic guidance comes into relief. So several months ago, we talked about the AI, CPA, and FASB. They're still working on their own policies around these types of assets. So having to stay up to date and quickly reactive to that would be their difficult, their complex set of challenges. In terms of education, what I have here is bachelor's degree from an accredited university, CPA be required, and they would have to have their CPE credits in line, 5+ years of being in a similar position and commensurate experience with GASB, and then hands-on experience with blockchain or digital assets. This could be a remote role, but Wyoming would certainly be preferred. In terms of their knowledge base, subject matter expertise, it's kind of a given, understanding financial services and regulations, knowledgeable about cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and stablecoins specifically, and how that comes into play from a reporting perspective, coordinating with counterparties and communication therein, incident response and management. If anything happens that we need to know about, they need to be able to triage that quickly, understanding the legal and regulatory landscape, and strong ethical standards. Are there any questions on the CFO role?
Any questions?
I do, Anthony. So I know that the format for this document is a little bit difficult to edit due to certain controls that were put in the setup of the document, so I left it alone. But the CFO should not be responsible for compliance with KIC and AML. That is a role for the compliance and risk officer. The CFO will be part of the implementation of those policies. However, setting up the policy as well, ensuring controls and doing auditing of that will be part of the compliance and risk officer's duty. So duty number 2, I recommend that we move on to the CCRO job description, as well as a portion of duty number 5. Obviously, the CFO will be responsible for implementing internal controls to mitigate liquidity risk, credit risk, anything that is financial risk. However, the oversight will be residing with the risk officer as well. So there will be some editing on duty number 5 and transfer of duty number 2, if I'm not mistaken, to the compliance officer. Thank you, Anthony.
Director Apollo, any answer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Naves, thank you for the comments. Apologies that these documents are somehow extremely encrypted in their templates and hard to put commentary on, but I certainly appreciate you taking a look through them and letting me know. Happy to make that change.
Thank you.
Very good. Further comments? Hearing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr.
Now
Chairman.
to-
So we are moving on to the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. And again, we'll certainly take Commissioner Navis's comment into consideration as we make those changes. So the CRCO is responsible for leading a comprehensive compliance function commensurate with the Wyoming Stable Tokens risk profile. The CRCO will design and manage a compliance and risk management system incorporating multiple levels of responsibility and oversight to meet all relevant laws, regulations, and industry standards, including the Bank Secrecy Act and KYC AML requirements. And they report to the executive director with a direct line to the commission. So if they need to go around the ED for any reason, they can certainly do so. In terms of their duties, We have risk management, strategy development, and execution. So of course, creating that kind of framework of what we're up against and how we mitigate given risks. Policy development and governance. So this is drafting and deploying foundational policies and procedures to manage those risks and remain in compliance. Monitoring and reporting, conducting tests and reviews of policies to make sure that as things shift, we remain in compliance. Stakeholder communications, letting the given internal and external resources know where we are, and using that as ability to gather data, perform risk assessments, and socialize the results. Public comment, my take is this role should be someone who, as different pieces of legislation are put forth, similar to the act we talked about today, this would be the resource who would help us create a commission level response to that and perhaps submit any kind of given comments as needed. Internal reporting, again, letting the commission and the director know where we are in our various compliance environments. That could be anything from cybersecurity to other types of legal frameworks. Industry monitoring, staying on top of everything that's happening in the space. Supervisory responsibilities is currently no. They don't have anyone in place that they would oversee necessarily. However, they would be overseeing any of our external vendors that we have relationships with. The next section is blank because we don't have them overseeing employees. Budgetary responsibilities, we do not expect them to have any budgetary responsibilities. The next section is blank as well. And in terms of their authority, they would be able to draft all of these various compliance reports for the agency, coordinate and correspond with third-party vendors as relevant, facilitate risk assessments and perform remediation, perform outreach and communication with the legal community. Again, as these different policies get put forth, proposed, they could respond to that on behalf of the Stable Token Commission. Again, anything that they would not be responsible for would be the remit of the commission, so rules, policies, hiring decisions, and overall budget that would be ratified by the commission or other agencies. Challenges, again, typical day-to-day. We have to build this in a shifting environment. In terms of the most complex challenges, ensuring the economic and technical design of the Wyoming Stable Token complies with the complex web of established domestic laws, regulations that are currently being debated, potentially international frameworks, and the ability to triage and respond to inbound inquiry from federal regulators. In terms of education and licensing, we have here a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, a chief certified risk manager or equivalent certification, 10+ years in a familiar role, and then hands-on experience with cryptocurrency, blockchain, or digital assets, potentially a remote role, but Wyoming certainly preferred. In terms of knowledge and skills, their subject matter expertise would pertain to financial instruments, global transmission of funds, Bank Secrecy Act, AML requirements, et cetera. The risk management expertise would include being able to understand and generate any kind of given framework. We certainly want them to have knowledge of cryptocurrencies and stablecoins, financial acumen, so the dollars that are going back and forth kind of play into the risk environment. Inquiry response management, they're able to handle any inbound inquiries from regulators, and has a strong leadership that can represent us, and strong ethical standards. Any questions on the CRCO role? And again, Commissioner Naves will certainly take your previous comments on the CFO role into the CRCO role.
Let me just ask, is that the suggestion, I think, would be to move duty 2 from the previous JCQ to probably duty 1? Is that correct on this?
Through the chair, yes, I think from my perspective, it'd be duty 1 or 2, just looking at the percentage of time allocation. And Commissioner Naves, I'll certainly let you respond to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Yeah, I would say, Governor, this is probably going to become duty number 1, and with risk management coming as duty number 2, because again, this is the compliance role plus the risk position. So 2 different functions that this leader is going to be taking. So we will be duty number 1, the compliance program, duty number 2, the risk management program. And then within those, duty number 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, they fall within those. I would say, Anthony, I'll work with you to ensure that we are moving these duties as part of some of the broader compliance of the bigger risk policy. And we're probably gonna have some different numbering here, but Governor, in essence, what you said is correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on that? All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner Alves and Director. Good work. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, just one more. The Chief Information Security Officer will be responsible for supervising all cybersecurity matters related to the Wyoming Stable Token in accordance with cybersecurity laws and best practices. They'll provide oversight to ensure all aspects of the Stable Token and the cybersecurity program are current and in adherence to regulatory requirements, which includes cybersecurity risk assessment. They'll complete recommendations to remediate identified risks. They'll review the cybersecurity policy on an annual basis and update as necessary, retain all evidence of the reviews performed, and provide those to the Commission. In terms of their essential duties, number one here is cybersecurity threat assessment and compliance. So they'll design, deploy, and oversee all cybersecurity-related activities of the Commission and maintain compliance with applicable laws. Understand that this is a very dynamic process. In terms of cybersecurity risk assessments, this is a more proactive role in which they would kind of survey the landscape of blockchain digital assets for any kind of bad actors, perhaps perform red and blue team exercises or white hat, black hat testing, essentially just vernacular for trying to break our own system in a way, remediate those risks as they come up, review and update that cybersecurity policy that we'll have in place, retain and review evidence that comes out of those reviews, and perform internal reporting. Again, that would go to the director and or the commission. And of course, like we have with everybody, continually monitor the industry. They would not have any kind of supervisory responsibilities, i.e. no employees under them. They would have, in the work direction section, they would be working with any kind of technology partners we have extremely closely. And in terms of budgetary responsibility, they would have none. Which again, I think I've stapled over, but they should be none. No, sorry, that is something, apologies, something got cut off here. This position should be responsible for staying within an assigned budget, and that budget is the $500,000 to $1 million range. That might be for any kind of testing of our systems, if we need to bring in additional code auditors, if we need to perform stress testing, or again, try to break our own system, and any kind of investigation for illicit activity, I think would fall into that bucket as well. So that's the budget side of things. Apologies if that's cut off or stapled on your side. In terms of their authority, they'll be able to draft cybersecurity policies for the agency, coordinate and manage external third-party vendors, plan and facilitate red and blue team exercises, set bug bounties, which is another part of that potential budget, which essentially says if you find a problem with our system and tell us about it before someone hacks it, we'll give you some amount of funding. Outreach and communication with the developer community. And then what they refer to the commission or others for, again, rules, policies, hiring decisions, and budget. Challenges, the day-to-day, continuing forward momentum, they're in a shifting environment. The most complex problems here would be if we have a bad actor who perhaps compromises one of our third-party partners and somehow comes into possession of stable tokens or compromises of someone else's system that we may be licensing or using. Being able to triage that within 24 hours is going to be a pretty significant piece of their complex challenge there. In terms of the certifications and education, again, bachelor degree from an accredited university, certified information systems security professional or equivalent certification, 10+ years of management level experience within cybersecurity, robust hands-on experience with cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital assets, possibly remote, Wyoming preferred. And in terms of the knowledge base, again, subject matter expertise, very specific to cybersecurity, well aware of cryptocurrency and stablecoin specifics, familiar with network and system security. So again, we are going to, the current outlay of how we'll be building the stable token is by working with several vendors to put this all together, making sure they've got the experience of similar projects where you have typical different systems coming together into one cohesive whole. Regulatory compliance, making sure that we stay in good graces there. Incident response and management, able to handle any kind of issues that come our way quickly. Strong leadership, strong ethical standards. And that is the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer role, the last one I had for you.
Thank you, Director. The only thing I would say under work direction, I do believe you're going to have to work with ETS, so I don't know if you want to add that within work direction, because I think that's going to be, that could be probably pieces of the technology provider, but I just think the interaction between ETS and whatever we're going to be doing is going to be important.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, happy to make that update. Again, whatever systems we're building kind of independently for the staple token will likely cross over, messaging platforms, APIs, so well taken. I like that.
Commissioner Meyer.
And on, I guess, the question of ETS, it seems to me that they're awfully proud of their firewall and thinks, primarily that nothing can get through it. And I hope in this one here that if we're behind that firewall, we've got another totally separate security system that would even be more robust, because I think there's going to be a lot more, a bigger target on this. So hopefully there's going to be some structure that we're going to be able to leverage what we have and add to it, is what I'm saying, rather than just relying on what we have today.
Yeah, and Mr. Treasurer, I think my thought on that, this may be somewhat of a standalone, but there probably is communication, so it may be, a robust sort of fortified area outside, but we need to make sure that communication's back and forth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll note that Commissioner Navas has her hand up.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Anthony. So couple of things. I think the challenge that the CISO is going to have, everyone else involved in this commission will have. That's one of the downsides of operating in the blockchain. Unlike traditional financial services that operate Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., this is 24/7. So if something wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, because there's something happening, we are all going to be awakened at the same time. The one point to discuss is the CISO's guidance to the commission around the multi-chain implementation approach and doing research on the additional chains under the guidance of the commission, obviously, on the implementation process, security, stability, everything else. As we discussed earlier, and you made the announcement at the beginning of the call, the initial chain for deployment has not been decided upon yet. However, we have discussed as a commission that this is a multi-chain project. New chains will be added in short order, but they will be subject to, as with the initial chain, extraneous review to ensure, again, security, stability, and everything else. So the CISO would play a critical role in supporting the commission in understanding what those risks are, in providing more additional background into those proposed chains. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks. Further questions? Commissioner Wallace.
Yeah, just a question, and I maybe am not that familiar with this industry, so are we limiting ourselves at all by requiring a bachelor's degree? I mean, are there other training areas that maybe they don't have a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, but they might still be a really good IT guy?
Through the chair, Commissioner Wallace, great question. I am certainly not married to keeping that requirement in there. As a quick anecdote, when I worked at a firm called Consensus, which is an Ethereum incubator out in Brooklyn, they would just have people show up on the doorstep of the building and have a portfolio that was essentially comprised of a GitHub account and their code base. And they would say, here's what I've built. Is there a role here for me? And sometimes the answer was yes. So not saying we would do that, but that is the other side of the spectrum where we want to make sure that we're making this a very open role. I think that's possible. What I will say is again, this is my own personal opinion, certainly open for discussion from the commission. For the CISO role, we need someone who's fairly senior and has been around for a while. And those types of situations I found typically manifest with a younger group. But again, I'm open to discussion of that.
Commissioner Wallace, any follow-up on that?
No, I guess my thought would be that, you could condition it that it's preferred, but if you find the right person without it, you would hate to eliminate them from the position just because they don't. But like you said, if it means you're gonna get 80 applications from unqualified applicants, that I could understand that too.
Good suggestion.
Governor, just have a final comment on this one, following up from Jeff's. So I would anticipate this role to have very high visibility, especially if the stablecoin bill that is being proposed becomes effective. This is someone that is going to be asked questions by the Federal Reserve, someone that is going to be talking to banks and everything else. So the level of seniority, as Anthony mentioned, is going to be expected, not only educational background, but also someone that has been in this industry for a long time and has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the very ugly as well, which may not manifest with a younger crowd or someone that may not have that kind of background. So I would just like to highlight that not only this is someone that is going to be owning the totality of the cybersecurity program for the token, but someone that is expected in the future to be facing federal regulators and answering very tough questions, especially if the token experiences a breach. So we should keep in mind the type of person that we want for this role.
Thank you, Commissioner Alves. Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to backtrack any, but I'd like to at some point kind of review the educational requirements of a couple of these because after the comments of Commissioner Naves and Commissioner Wallace, I think there could be other things we can look at, like on the CFO role, you can look for chartered financial analysts that are, as much as it pains me to say, that may be better suited than a CPA to that role. And again, all of these roles will have the potential to be in front of regulators, to be in front of industry groups, and you know, I don't want to limit us, but I also don't want to make it so broad that we don't get the correct applicants in. And so I think we can look at each of those segments and refine them to some very appropriate professionals that we can look at.
Commissioner Pope, thank you. In the interest of making sure that we don't delay our process here, Director, I guess I'm going to look to the commission to see if there's, you know, there may be some edits or something. I don't want to, you know, take 2 months to figure this out. Maybe it's, you know, more timely than that. I don't know if you have any perspective on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the comment, Commissioner Pope. From my perspective, if we think these are pretty close to the pin, and it sounds like we may be in, maybe there's one kind of target area we want to make sure we're not broadening or tightening the funnel too much. We're happy to tighten that up. This is the beginning of the process, right? So we still need to go work with A&I, the State Budget Department, HRD, and figure out some of this behind the scenes anyway. So in my perspective, this is just to kickstart us down that road. Again, I spoke with some of the A&I and HRD resources at the job fair the other day. I think there's still some questions about how immediately we could start getting people on board. Again, we do have budget in this biennium. Perhaps we can bring on the project manager already and move expeditiously. Perhaps some of these have a 7-1 limitation. I need to get a better idea of some of those details from the State Budget Department and what they're seeing on their side and their systems and make sure we're all aligned there. So while that's happening, we could tighten up a little bit of language here. If these need to be approved through like a short executive session, then so be it. But the point I think is we can, if these are, again, about there, we can start having those conversations. And if we need to refine certain things along the way, I think we'll have the ability to do that.
Thank you, Director. Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, I'm comfortable with not taking a formal final approval of these. I think the director has heard our concerns today to just not limit us too much unless we've opened the floodgates too far, in which we should limit it a little bit. And just anecdotally, because I'm assuming these will, as a starter, go out on the state's, the NeoGov site. Gosh, people don't pay attention to the requirements for what it's worth. And I'm sure that some must, but I feel like we get dozens of applications that do not meet the minimum qualifications we've put. So I don't have a lot of concern. And I think particularly when these go out to a wider, more industry-specific audience, I think that there will be even, and again, I'm not categorizing or stereotyping. I don't think that'll be a roadblock to people if they see, okay, I've got the equivalent of that. At least I have found that generally you still get all the applications regardless.
And Commissioner Racines, I think that's a good point. I would note, I think that Commissioner Navas is saying that these are going to get additional scrutiny. I think they should be carefully
Right.
thought through. I mean, what we do. And I guess, Director, from my standpoint, I agree. I don't think we need to have multiple drafts and circulations and other things. I think they are, if hearing no objection, pretty close to the mark, but it may make sense to just kind of walk quickly through this, and certainly a phone call can, if necessary, be able to pull us together. Commissioner Meyer.
One of the things, if it's possible, and I found this to be really, really helpful, is to have some kind of a skills test. Because we've had some people that came in and just gave great interviews, and we wanted to hire them for higher positions. And then we find out after the small skills test is that they don't know what our underlying product is or what we do. So, that might weed out some of these people that have a great education, but they don't know what's going on. I think to the point that was made earlier, some people don't have a great education, but they know what's going on. But yeah, just kind of some kind of a 5-6 question test that in your mind would really separate the so-called wheat from the chaff there pretty quick.
Through the chair, thank you for the comment, Commissioner Meyer. Generally agree. I think the one issue I have is these people should probably be smarter than I am on certain subjects, right? When it comes to something like a skills test, I think some of these roles, as Commissioner Navas mentioned, these may be people that we're looking at who've already done their testimony in front of, groups in DC at the federal level. We may just be able to pull up YouTube videos of them or, recordings of them and see that, right? I think that's the caliber of personnel that we need here. So certainly not saying no to that. I'm just saying it might have different formats for what a skills test might be.
And the skills test might be include the past experience that you actually are trying to hire for. So, but something just so when you do your interviews, that there might be something later that they actually take if you just to make sure that you've got somebody that can do the job.
And I think that's good advice. I would point out that we're really talking about job descriptions at this point, and the interview process is a little different.
Right.
But
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick response to your comment and Commissioner Racines' comment. As we move forward with this process, these Word documents need to go into a formal platform anyway, and they're roughly one-to-one, but they're not exactly one-to-one. So perhaps we just move all these forward, and we need to make those couple of edits. We do it as like one last action before we hit the big red launch button.
if that makes sense to the commission, I'm certainly comfortable with that. All right. Director, it appears to me that and I know we want to talk a little bit more specifically about you, but, and I don't know how the commission wants to do this. I think it is anticipated we might go into an executive session at this point to really discuss that. But it also seems to me that there are a few people, and maybe some people online, that we may want to put that a little further down on the list. But that, I would say, would be up to the commission here. So I'll leave it to you, Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with moving that down. I mean, I know I can not predict this, but I would anticipate the executive session to be very brief. So I think leaving that to the end is fine, or pushing it back, I mean.
That's fine? Is that, okay, well, let's do that then, and we'll let you go on to the next topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we'll accelerate from here, so hopefully you'll get to that discussion fairly soon. So if you flip over your agenda, top of page 2, this is where we talk about logistics. The first thing on this list is the 2024 budget session review memo, which you should all have. I thought I had it, and now I can't find it. Not that it matters all that much. Really, this is, did you get the extra?
I have an extra. Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, I was staring at it. There we go. The 2024 budget session review memo, this is materially the same document we looked at last time. However, I do want to make one note, which was our last discussion was March 21st. At that time, the budget had not yet been signed yet. So what I've done is added a note, being at the bottom of page 5 and goes to the top of page 6, that House Enrolled Act number 50, formerly being House Bill 1, was signed by Governor Gordon on March 23rd, inclusive of line item vetoes and given chapter number CHO-118, and that budget goes into effect on July 1st of 2024. Again, we are in line to receive a budget of $5.8 million on that date. Governor Gordon also made a line item veto to section 091, which is our agency, in footnote number 3, with the conforming veto in section 300N, to remove the word only from the proposed language, which was the Wyoming Stable Token Commission shall endeavor to contract with only Wyoming domiciled entities when conducting business funded by the transfer required by this subsection. And in his line item veto, Governor Gordon stated, the commission shall endeavor to work with Wyoming domiciled entities, but we do not want to cause undue hardship on the commission as it has no control over the location of qualified entities. So that was the end of the budget session for us. So the only last comment I'll make is for those who've been following some of the ongoings in Wyoming, there was a poll to see if some of our legislators would come back as part of a special session, and that was opposed, and that will not be happening. So I just want to make sure we close the loop on the budget and those discussions and can move forward with that mutual understanding. Are there any questions on that?
And Director, I want to emphasize, since it's my veto message, the intent here is to make sure that we work with Wyoming entities, and we really want it. Endeavor means a lot of diligence in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fully agreed on that note. With that being said, I think there's no other questions. I'll move on to what's referred to as the contact list, which is the other long paper you have in your dockets there. This is, again, the list of everyone I've spoken to, essentially from when we kicked off the RFI process around Thanksgiving of last year to now. Again, this is something that we'll keep amongst the commissioners because there's lots of contact information on here. But this, if you have any questions about who we've talked to or the context of those conversations or when they happened, all of that information is here. What I'll note is on the back, on the last page, there's a quick little pivot table. I've been in contact with, which would either be a text or an email, 406 people, and have met with 284 of them. And you can see that those are broken out predominantly people who we would classify as vendors who are interested in performing some services, paid services for the commission. But there's also a good number of folks on here who would be interested in helping us in the subcommittee space as well as we bring those back online, and a bit more about that in just a few moments. any questions on this? I think this is more of a kind of digest a little later rather than walking through it, but happy to answer any questions you may have on that document.
Any questions? Any questions? Commissioner Pope?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. It's an impressive number of contacts. Thank you for your work.
Through the chair, thank you, Commissioner Pope. I do talk a lot, so perhaps that's a helpful asset to have in these discussions, but thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And Commissioner Naves or Commissioner Revelle, it is a little hard for me to see if you've got your hand up, so you just blurt it out if you've got something you want to add.
We do, Governor. Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to, I think, the last document or documents you have. This is the rulemaking memo. We'll spend a few minutes on this, and I think the rest of this will go pretty quick. So at the end of our last conversation, we briefly spoke about some of the procedural steps for rulemaking. And I certainly process that as someone who's a bit new to government work, I had to learn about to get a sense of the robustness of the rulemaking process. So what I did was put a memo together to give some context to that process, which was very helpful. And I want to quickly just shout out Devin Kenny with the Attorney General's office, who's been incredibly helpful in getting my head wrapped around all of this. But essentially, this provides context to the process and then some thoughts on how we would move forward with certain things that I believe should be in scope for our own rulemaking procedures. So to hop into this, again, our agency is an instrumentality of the state of Wyoming, and statutorily, we have the ability to adopt our own rules and regulations. They do have to go through the state's administrative process, which is the other document you have in front of you. This is the APA. Title 16, Chapter 3, that's this document right here. So this is the document that carves out most of the statutory requirements for rulemaking. And I've also provided a link in my emails to you to the Attorney General's Rules Handbook. That's not one of those I printed, but you have that as well. And that kind of dictates the steps required for the rulemaking process. What I want to call out just up front is this formal process can take some time. If you line up all of the dates of when different pieces of this go forward, when things get signed off on, and critically a public comment period of 45 days, the process can take anywhere from 120 to 160 days. So we need to start working on this sooner rather than later, and I'm certainly happy to do so, but I do want to impress the timeline required here through the formal rulemaking process. The other thing I wanted to put out there, and I do believe this is a factually accurate statement, although perhaps things will change with the stablecoin bill being put forth. The rulemaking process, by doing so, by putting rules forward and going through that, we are creating law within the state of Wyoming. And should we do that around the stable token, particularly around how it may be issued, redeemed, burnt, frozen, et cetera, I do believe we'd be creating the first law in the United States of America for that. Again, if you look at the stablecoin bill, if you look at what New York Department of Financial Services has with their guidance, that's particularly around reserves composition. We will be making the first laws in the US around stable tokens. And I do want to impress upon the commission. I think you're all aware of it. I think it's also a testament to the opportunity that we have in front of us and the work that's gone into this along the years to get here. So quickly pointing that out, because if we're able to get that done, certainly a feather in our cap. So moving forward, I have here commission action. There's no particular action required from any commission, the commission or commissioners at this time. However, I would implore you to become familiar with the statutory requirements for rulemaking, review both the APA and the Rules Handbook, and then we should anticipate, change that. We should anticipate a vote in the near future on procurement rules, which I'll talk about more in a second. We'll flip that over. There is also the Management Council is part of this process. So I've linked their website here through WyoLedge, which you can see some of their rulemaking committees before. So that gives you some familiarity there. And then on May 10th, so in a few weeks, the Attorney General's office will be hosting an optional training session on rulemaking, policies, and ethics, which I believe will take place in this very room. I will be attending that, and if any other commissioners are interested in doing so, they are certainly invited to attend as well. So in terms of rulemaking steps, again, we're going to defer to the rules handbook on this, which I've linked here for your review. The steps, there's a checklist of steps to be performed. That's pages 4 through 9. And it's fairly comprehensive. You'll see how much goes into this. And I also want to point out that this process requires coordination across multiple different offices and agencies. So the Office of the Governor, the Secretary of State's office, the Attorney General's office, the Legislative Services Office, and the Management Council. And again, I do want to just doubly point out here that this process does take some time, and there's a 45-day public comment period. So whenever we put out our preliminary set of rules, there will be a period of time which the public can respond to that. Flipping over to page 3, to provide some quick context here, there is potential for emergency rulemaking. This is the process by which you can cut out some of the steps that go into the formal rulemaking process, the public comment period being one of them. However, there's a couple of caveats. One is emergency rulemaking can be adopted for 120 days, and then you have a chance to extend it for an additional 120 days for a total of 240 days. After that, the rules would fall out of force. So the goal here would be if you're creating a set of emergency rules, the expectation should be that you're trying to put the formal rules in place behind those, just based on the timeline. There also needs to be significant justification for the creation of emergency rules. So we can't just simply decide, well, we want to do this tomorrow, so here's a whole new rule set. There'll need to be a reason why we would go down that path. And to that extent, the next section here is scope, and there are 3 different sets of rules I think the commission should be considering. This again goes back to the rules handbook that the AG puts out, which dictates when something should be a rule or something should be a policy. Typically things are rules when they could impact members of the public. And I think much of what we're doing could fall into that. So the rule sets that I think should be considered, personal opinion, would be a set of rules around procurement. So again, during the budget session, we did pass amendments to the Stable Token Act, which allow us to put our own procurement policies in place. So we have the ability to do that, and this would allow us to pursue that. There would also be what I refer to as WYST token rules. This is where we would want to have our rule set put forth on how we issue, burn, freeze, or interdict, or redeem tokens, and how or if those things should be doable. And then also investment rules. I would expect that we'd work with the State Treasurer's Office here to put a bit more context around how the commission will be handling the reserves, where those handshakes are, how redemptions occur could be part of that as well from the dollar side, the fiat side, and move forward on that. Again, I will also be specific. There is a chance to put more granular steps into policies and procedures, but so the rules can be somewhat high level, but they should be more prescriptive than the statute. And net at the end of the day, what we should be giving is both the Wyoming citizenry and those interested in using Wyoming stable tokens confidence in doing so. So the last piece on here, which is the timeline, I believe that we should pursue perhaps emergency rulemaking on the procurement rules. At our last discussion, we had talked about moving forward with pre-qualification steps and trying to line up interviews potentially in mid-June to early July in anticipation of receiving the budget on July 1st. Based on what will need to go into that, which is I'm saying I candidly did not have at that time, and I do apologize for that. We'll probably need to push that back a little bit. But the goal here, I believe, would still be to get procurement rules through fairly quickly. And one of the things I'll note, again, not part of this package, it could be for a subsequent discussion, but there are also agencies that have gone ahead and created their own rule sets. The State Construction Department has done so fairly recently. I've looked at all of these different agencies that have their own rules for procurement, that have their own policies and procedures around procurement. And I think we could put something together based on the best practices of all those different agencies. And again, having a little bit of bias to what was done most recently. Then I would certainly suggest that the commission go through the process of formal rulemaking for the creation of any kind of rules around the stable token and around the investments that would be made through the receipt of consumer funds and investment into treasuries and elsewhere. I think I'll pause there.
Okay.
For a moment.
And Director, on the investment rules, and Commissioner Meyer, it seems to me there may be also a category of whether we want a custody in the same location as the state's, other assets as well. At least it's worth conversation, I think.
I think JP Morgan is, I guess I'd describe him as cool as to having anything to do with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess, my point is, that on that, it was received, invested, and redeemed, and I'm thinking custody might be added to that list.
Yeah, yeah.
And Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree, custody rules around institutions used for custody should probably be part of the investment rules or a separate category on its own.
Yeah, you have to talk about it. I just don't
Yeah.
know whether JP Morgan's going to be, there's 2 or 3 other major banks that have a lot more, I guess, they're more likely than not would work with us where JP Morgan will.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be understood that these are not going to be commingled funds, and
Absolutely.
yeah. So, 2 other observations on them. I share the view that there is a sense of urgency on the procurement rules, just because I think it's valuable to get going on that. I think trying to make sure that we have an adequate reason for engaging in emergency rulemaking, there might be some valuable conversation this commission can have. It does seem to me too that the other 2 sets of rules probably ought to go along at about the same rate. They probably don't have quite the same urgency, but they certainly would inform the procurement process. And generally speaking, when it comes to emergency rules, the view is that those rules are going to be pretty much the rules that are going to go out for public comment. I don't know if others have points of view on this, but those were the 2 things I wanted to add.
Anthony, I had a few questions, and I'm not gonna throw them all on you at once, so I'll go in order, please. You mentioned that rules are required when they have an impact on the public. Do we know what that means? Because it can mean a lot of different things. Did you get guidance from the Attorney General's office of what that interpretation is?
Through the chair, Commissioner Navas, thank you for the question. So in the rules handbook, which should be uploaded in that drive file, if you were to open that, chapter 2 is called determining when a rule should be promulgated. That starts on page 2, not Romanet 2, but just regular page 2. This, I think, will give you a good idea, particularly as a section called distinguishing rules from policies and procedures. And that's where this guidance would come from.
So this is the document that is 67 pages long, the rules handbook, Anthony, that you mentioned?
Through the chair, Commissioner Navas, that's correct.
Okay, all right. I will take a look at that. Thank you. You did also mention that you looked at other entities within the state to be able to determine whether policies or rules are required for different actions. Based on your initial assessment, are there any material differences in making that determination? How would the commission, guide itself in determining whether something could live as a policy, such as, for example, procurement? Is this all, again, referring to this handbook, or is there something else that we should be looking at?
Through the chair, Commissioner Navas, thank you for the question. I think generally speaking, we should be going to the handbook on the determination of when something is a rule or when something is a policy and procedure. I'd also make sure to mention that if we put rules forward for any given element here, that will probably also need policies and procedures behind it for the granular steps. So in that capacity, I think there's gonna be some instances where we'll need, if we have rules, we'll also have policies and procedures behind it. If we have policy and procedures that may not need rules, those can stand alone, if I understood the question correctly.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is understand how other bodies of the government, in the same way, instrumentalities of the state of Wyoming as the commission is, have made assessments about the applicability of this rule process in the past. We are not the same as anyone else, and we should be looking at our own processes ourselves, but it's informative to understand how others that stand in the same position as the commission have gone through this process. Understanding what this rules handbook is and the implication that this would have not only to the issuance process, but also to your point about creating laws in the United States for the issuance of stable coins is something that we need to consider with care. I don't know, at least for myself, that I did anticipate that, for example, the reserve management policy would actually become a law, a state law. And this will probably be just my own ignorance around this process, and I'm learning now. But it just will be really good for the commission to have a greater understanding of what that means. Because again, for the timeline for the issuance, as well as what that means going forward for the state as we go through this process.
Director.
Through the chair, Commissioner Navas, again, thank you for the commentary. A few things in there. One is I think I'm also learning along the way as you are on some of this. So I think we're together on that. Another thing I want to mention is, you mentioned we're not like anyone else, and that's certainly the case, right? So when we look at some of the more recent rules that went up, again, I was looking closely at the state construction department's rule set around procurement because it's the most recent one. And I think we want to peg pretty closely to some of it because it is broken out to chapters. It might be a chapter on bidding, there's a chapter on awards, there's a chapter on protests. We're not going to have a chapter on how to build buildings, but we'll certainly have chapters on, how things may work on a technical side. That's another element of it. And again, I certainly don't want to speak for any other agencies and how they came to their determinations. Some I think would be easy. If you're putting up a building, well, that might require rules on how you're going to do that because that's going to affect the citizenry around you. And that's a pretty obvious example. But there are some that may be more subtle. And I candidly don't have the context. I'm happy to ask around with some of the other agencies, but unless we do have Mr. Kenny in the room, unless Mr. Kenny wanted to provide any context that he may have from working with some of the other agencies around how they went through their decision-making process to determine whether it was rules or policies. I'm happy to follow up on that thread, but again, I think we are so different, we should be considering things somewhat on an island, and that island is the rules handbook that we should be looking at.
And Director, I think Mr. Kinney probably can offer some perspective to this, but just putting a couple of things in context. One is rulemaking authority is derived from legislative action. The legislature makes laws and can delegate some of that authority within rules, but those rules have to stay within the stricture of what the legislature has given us. And I am particularly advised by the AG as to whether, we are going out on an expedition or not in any of that. And I just wanted to make it sure that people understood while rules have the force of law, they are not the same as law. They are delegated rulemaking authority. So that was point one. And then point two, procurement per se, is not a new enterprise for the state, as we've talked about. And I think that to some degree can enable us to move forward with some confidence. The token rules become a little more interesting. I think that's the point you're making about New York's comment, in that we've got to be mindful very precisely of what is within our purview and what is not. And that's why I think that probably avails itself of a very full conversation. And the investment rules, I think, those kind of come back into, we've done this in some other places. There may be some exceptional circumstances that make this different. And last comment I make on that is really reflective of the fact that when you go out, let's say for procurement, you know, there are within the state, and Devin probably can help with this, and AI can probably help with this too. There are, you know, there are multiple categories, and maybe Auditor, you have some perspective on this, but there are multiple ways that you can do this. And if there is a subset of talents, for lack of a better phrase, that you really want to look for, there are ways to narrow that environment, and that probably is something we want to look at very, very thoughtfully, so that we don't just waste everybody's time.
Mr. Chairman, if I may quickly, before Auditor, see if you got anything else to add. We did in the last discussion talk about a pre-qualification process, right? And that's something that I think would kind of fit into the whole schematic here. We know from the previous conversations about RFPs and how we would consolidate those, what features we would be looking for in a singular partner or consortium of partners that we could treat as a standalone entity. And I think manifesting that through a pre-qual process would help us streamline that quite a bit.
Yeah. Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. The statute gives us, let's see, it states the commission shall adopt rules and regulations. Are those two terms used synonymously, or is there a difference? And if so, where would one be a rule as opposed to a regulation? And is there a different process for regulations than there are for rules?
Mr. Kenny, come on down.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner Pope. No, those terms are fairly synonymous when used in statute. That I'm not entirely sure why it necessarily uses both of those terms, but there really isn't any functional difference between rules and regulations. Sort of like when they say policy and procedure, there may be a slight bit more difference between policy and procedure, but they sort of bleed over together. But rules and regulations are basically synonymous.
Yeah, please, Commissioner.
But the procedure for adopting a regulation would be the same as adopting a rule?
Yes, Chairman, Commissioner Pope, that is correct.
And Devin, since you're here, can you touch briefly on, I don't want to say definitional terms about emergency, but the things that can enable emergency rules?
Yes, Chairman. So, I mean, I don't know that there's sort of like limitations that say, you know, you can't have an emergency for this, that, or the other. But the sort of things that we typically would look at are often like a timing sort of thing. For example, if, you know, occasionally, I don't think this is the case, but occasionally there will be a statute that says rules need to be adopted by X date, and there just isn't sufficient time. You know, as Director Apollo outlined, the regular rules process takes a certain amount of time. You know, it just does. You know, and that's not including any time to draft rules, or if you want to allow some kind of comment for the public outside of the official comment period, because you can only make limited changes there. So if you want to have an additional sort of comment before that, you know, that just isn't, in some instances, there just isn't sufficient time to adopt them. Other instances might be, you know, like when we had during the COVID-19, you know, pandemic, there were a number of things that, I mean, not necessarily relevant to this board, but relevant to other boards that arose, you know, for example, in the building commission, that because the use of state buildings and, you know, various health procedures and things like that, that, you know, we needed to, there was no statute, you know, requiring us to adopt by a certain date. But because of the pandemic situation, it made sense that we adopted something quickly. And it also made sense because in the pandemic situation, we weren't, you know, imagining that it would continue indefinitely. We didn't necessarily need a regular rule that would stay in place indefinitely. Emergency rules last for 120 days and then can be renewed for another 120 days. There are instances when, you know, like an emergent situation might arise that you only need a temporary rule. You know, maybe later you could determine you wanted a regular rule, be permanent, but at least at the time it might only need an emergent sort of rule. An emergency situation might make sense. In this context, it may or may not make sense, depending on, you know, how soon, for example, in the procurement rules, how soon that you needed those. I mean, there is no statutory deadline, like I mentioned. There's no statute that says you have to have done the procurement by X date. But if, you know, you could articulate a justification that we need, you know, that A&I's procurement rules, because you can continue, your authority allows you to use A&I's policies and procedures. But if you were able to articulate and say, well, their policies and procedures don't work because of X, Y, Z reason, we need this done within, you know, a short amount of time. There isn't sufficient time to adopt our own rules, which we would be allowed to do, but there isn't time to do that in this instance before we need it procured. You know, like that may be something that could justify an emergency rule. You would have to do that, though. You would have to explain those circumstances. We couldn't simply just say, well, it's an emergency because we feel like it. That doesn't work. But you do need, but if you can articulate a reason why you need to do rules quicker, essentially, then emergency rules can be done.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Meyer.
Always looking at, I guess, loopholes or whatever in these things. And so you say you have emergency rules, and during that time period, you start promulgating your regular rules and you have public comment. Can those things run concurrently?
Yes, Chairman, Commissioner Treasurer, yes, we typically, I mean, if, you know, like I mentioned, in the COVID-19 pandemic scenario, we didn't do a regular rule because that wasn't our intent. But generally speaking, when we're doing emergency rules, we do have the intent that whatever the emergency rule is, we do make a regular rule as well. So that will often happen, not always, but will often happen that we will simultaneously start that process with the idea that as soon as the regular rulemaking process finishes, it will replace the emergency rule.
So, follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The emergency rule, if it is changed from comment or any other reason, and that 120 days times out, can you, I guess, basically have an emergency rule for another 120 days? And would that allow you to go an extra 120 days to 360 because you changed it, or you are dead at the end of 120?
Chairman, Commissioner, it would depend on the level of the changes. Mm-hmm. If we were talking very minor sorts of changes, then I would say no. If there were more, you know, but basically, and without having the statute right in front of me, I can't, you know, quote it perfectly, but the idea is that you can't adopt the substantially same rules for more than ultimately 240 days. But if you were to make, you know, great changes, I mean, let's say you had it in 120 days, you get comments from the public. I mean, there isn't a comment period for emergency rules, but during that time period, you know, the public, you know, gives you feedback and says these rules are, you know, bad or whatever, in whatever way. Presumably, they're not going to say they're good and you're going to make changes based off that. They'll, you know, they're problematic in whatever way. If you were to come back and make big changes, you could probably, you could probably do another 120 days. But for minor changes, no.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks. And I think it is the intent of the legislation that you not just keep doing emergency rules and you only have 2 re-ups and they have to.
Precisely.
They have to have a value to them. Okay. Okay, commissioners, what is your what is your pleasure? Director, do you have any particular thoughts? My view is that probably we ought to start thinking about what these rules are going to look like on top to bottom. Procurement has its own particular, as I say, I think there's an urgency. But, you know, commissioners, I don't know if you have thoughts on this. Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I think I agree. Procurement, I think, is certainly the first on the triage list. I also think it's going to be by far the most straightforward because we have active examples that we can start with from other agencies. We may need to tweak those a little bit, but probably not that much, to be honest. So I think coming up with a solid draft to be considered potentially as an emergency rule is going to be, again, not necessarily easy, but a lot easier than the other two sets. That we will need them all, but the others, I think, are quite a bit behind in time frame.
Yeah, and I think Devin's point is also valid in the procurement. There's examples not only of successful procurement processes, but there's existing rules that could be tweaked. So what's the pleasure of the board on that? Do we move forward? Director, did you have a particular thought on this?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a particular thought, and I think it also just finishes out the logistics section of the agenda. We've talked rulemaking, we've talked about procurement. Also, the last piece on here is subcommittees and working groups. What I'd like to do, because we've been on a little bit of a hiatus with those, I think this is the perfect time to get those back online. I've put together a little bit of schematic. It's not something I have here or shared with the commissioners yet, but just get a sense of everyone's calendars and schedules and start working on this as soon as possible through the subcommittee processes that just kind of revitalize those and get going as early as next week.
So in that sense, on the subcommittees, you'd be looking at procurement, token rules, and investment rules as three potential subcommittees.
Mr. Chairman, to be semantic, I would probably treat those as three working groups under the rulemaking subcommittee. But yes.
Perfect. Are there objections from the commission? Hearing none. That sounds great, and we should get started.
Happy to, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Further comments on this topic? If there are none.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the diligence on this and all the context. I think we're at a point now where I'll quickly just mention some of our upcoming meetings and events, and then I will defer to you and the commission on whether you'd like to take public comment, then executive session, or vice versa.
I'll take public comment and then executive session, so.
Excellent. So I'll just quickly say, in terms of upcoming meetings and events, I will be speaking at the DC Blockchain Summit in Washington, DC on May 15th. I look forward to meeting our congressional delegation during that trip, and I'm happy to share, if it's broadcast, I'm happy to share that with the commission through our website as well. We also have the first meeting of the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Innovation happening this year. That takes place May 20th and 21st in Jackson. And I've added the link here because they started to put some of the materials and locations up for that discussion. I intend to dial into that. I do believe that, and I'll confirm with the co-chairs, I've heard from one of them, I think that all they want from our side is a status update, but I've offered if they're looking for anything more specific, we're happy to provide that. And then later that same week, we'll be back here for our 14th meeting on May 23rd, 9 a.m., Wyoming Capitol Auditorium.
Very good. Thank you. With that, I think we've come to the end of our agenda. If there are any commissioner comments, now would be a good time. If not, I will open it for public testimony. Hearing none, are there members of the public that wish to address the commission? Is there anyone online, Brian? No one online. I'll call one more time. Any public comments? If there are none, I think we're at a point where we can entertain going into an executive session for the purpose of, I think, personnel. It's been moved by Commissioner Pope. Is there support for Commissioner Pope's motion?
Second?
It's been seconded by the auditor. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Very good. We will now go into an executive session that will be closed. We'll take just a quick break to make sure that we have a secured room. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here today.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Yeah, could I just clarify for those of us here on the commission attending virtually? I did receive a calendar invite recently. Are we meant to go to that link to join the executive session?
Brian is suggesting that's what we do.
Very good. And approximately how much time before you plan to begin that?
Probably 5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, okay, so yeah, about 5, we'll come back in at 25 of 12. And so that'll be good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll call us back in. Director Apollo has just joined us again. I'll let him get his minute-taking efforts underway. And Director, I think we have a motion. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Auditor.
I would move that we renew the at-will employment contract with Anthony Apollo at the same rate of pay and all previous conditions as the current contract, with an end date of June 30th, 2026, which gets us through the next biennium for which we have budget.
And is there a second? It's been seconded by Commissioner Meyer, moved by Commissioner Racinas. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Commissioner, I would just note that the committee also thought it would be great to work on, I'm sure you'll be happy with this, to have a performance review as part of the just sort of ongoing effort. Sorry, can't find my words today. With that, if there is no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if there is nothing more to come before us, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
It's been moved. Second. It's been seconded by Commissioner Pope. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much for your work.